Thomas spent the rest of the day trapped in a fog of dread. Every detail he had witnessed replayed endlessly in his mind. Marlene entering that worn-down building, her swollen eyes when she left, and most of all, the mysterious man who had walked out beside her with such familiarity. By the time she returned home that evening, Thomas had imagined every painful possibility, from secret meetings to an emotional affair. His heart felt too heavy to sit still. Marlene entered the house quietly, dropping her bag by the door. She didn't notice Thomas watching her from the living room, his eyes searching her face for clues. When she finally looked up and met his gaze, something flickered across her expression. Surprise, perhaps, or guilt. Whatever it was, it pushed Thomas past the point of silence. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tighter than he intended. Marlene froze. For a second, she looked like she might run from the room. Instead, she sank into the chair across from him, hands trembling lightly in her lap. Thomas didn't want to explode or accuse her of anything, but the pain inside him was too raw to hide. "I followed you today," he admitted, watching her eyes widen. "I saw the building. I saw the man. And I saw you crying. Marlene, what's going on? Why are you hiding things from me?" The room went silent except for the sound of their breathing. Marlene's face crumpled, not in anger, but in something far more fragile. Her eyes filled with tears she couldn't blink away. She covered her mouth with her hands as if the truth physically hurt to hold inside. "I wasn't hiding another man," she whispered. "Thomas, he's not what you think." Thomas waited, caught between hope and fear. "He's my counselor," she finally said. "Grief counselor." Thomas stared at her, confused. "Grief? Marlene, we haven't lost anyone recently." A slow, heartbreaking shake of her head told him he was wrong. "I've been losing myself," she whispered. Those words hit Thomas like a punch to the chest. She took a deep breath, struggling to steady herself. "I didn't know how to tell you. Months ago, I was diagnosed with early-stage cognitive decline, memory lapses, confusion, all those little things you joked about. They weren't just age." She wiped her cheek. "I didn't want you to see me falling apart. I didn't want to burden you. So I went to counseling alone." Thomas's mind spun. The key, the secret building, the crying, the man. Everything he feared twisted into something entirely different, and somehow even more heartbreaking. "The key you found," she continued softly, "opens a storage locker. I keep letters in there, videos, journals, things to help me remember who I am, in case I can't one day." For a long moment, Thomas couldn't speak. Pain, love, fear, and regret collided inside him. He reached across the table and took her trembling hands. "You should have told me," he whispered. "I was scared," she said. "I still am." Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her as tightly as if she might slip away. "You don't have to face this alone. Not now, not ever." In that moment, everything changed. Not because their marriage was broken, but because the truth had finally stepped into the light. The days that followed Marlene's confession felt strangely suspended in time. Thomas moved through the house with a heaviness he couldn't shake, as if every familiar room had taken on a new meaning. He saw reminders everywhere. The calendar she occasionally forgot to update, the unfinished puzzle on the dining table, and the sticky notes she had begun to place on drawers and cupboards to help herself remember what belonged where. He had brushed off these little changes before. Now they felt like quiet warnings he had ignored. But beneath his fear was something stronger, a renewed love that demanded action. For almost 30 years, he had taken comfort in the predictable rhythms of their life. Now, Those rhythms were shifting, delicate and uncertain, and instead of resisting the change, Thomas found himself wanting to protect every second they still had. Marlene, meanwhile, seemed torn between relief and guilt. She was grateful the truth was no longer hidden, yet she struggled with the fear that she had shattered their sense of stability. Thomas noticed the way she watched him now, with cautious eyes, as though waiting for him to pull away or resent her for keeping the diagnosis secret. But he didn't. He couldn't. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Thomas reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. The gesture made her shoulders sag in quiet relief. "You're not a burden," he told her. "Not now, not ever." Marlene swallowed hard. "I didn't want to break your heart." "You didn't," he said softly. "You just told me the truth. And the truth gives us a chance to face this together." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, Thomas felt her relax. In the days that followed, he made a gentle effort to understand what she was going through. He read about her condition late into the night, learning everything he could: symptoms, progression, treatments, coping strategies. He attended one of her counseling sessions, and the same man he once suspected of being a threat greeted him with genuine warmth and compassion. Instead of jealousy, Thomas felt gratitude. He also learned about the locker. One afternoon, Marlene took him to the storage facility. She unlocked the small metal door and revealed what she had kept hidden: a box full of handwritten letters addressed to him, their children, and even their grandchildren. Letters filled with memories she feared she might one day forget to share. There were USB drives with recorded messages, photographs labeled carefully in her tidy handwriting, and the thick journal documenting her fears and hopes since her diagnosis. The sight broke him in a way he hadn't expected. She had been preparing for loss alone, silently, trying to preserve pieces of herself like someone storing sunlight in jars. He took her hand and kissed her forehead. "You don't need to do this alone," he whispered. The truth had been heavy, painful, and frightening, but it also gave their love a new depth, one defined not by routine, but by resilience, tenderness, and the courage to face an uncertain future together. The truth had changed everything, yet, strangely, it also brought Thomas and Marlene closer than they had been in years. Once the secrecy dissolved, a new clarity settled between them, something gentle and steady. Their life didn't suddenly become easy, but it became intentional. Every moment shifted from routine to purpose. Thomas began planning small adventures for them, nothing extravagant, just meaningful. They revisited the cafe where they had shared their first date, drove to the lake where they once spent long summer afternoons, and even took a weekend trip to the coastal town they had always talked about but never found the time to visit. Each journey reminded them that life wasn't measured only by years, but by the memories they chose to create. Marlene responded to these efforts with a quiet radiance. She laughed more, asked deeper questions, and held Thomas with a tenderness that came from knowing time was precious. She continued her counseling sessions, but now Thomas attended many of them with her, learning how to support her through the coming challenges. Instead of feeling shut out, he felt like a partner again, a true companion on the same path. The silver key, once a symbol of secrecy and fear, transformed into something beautiful. Marlene began referring to the locker not as her backup memory, but as their shared time capsule. Together, they added new letters, photos, and recordings, moments they wanted to preserve not because they expected loss, but because they cherished them. On quiet nights, Thomas and Marlene sat by the fireplace, sorting through old albums. Marlene sometimes forgot small details, but instead of panicking, she would smile, touch the picture gently, and say, "Tell me again." And Thomas did, patiently, lovingly, knowing that each retelling strengthened the bond between them. There were difficult moments, of course, days when Marlene became frustrated with herself, losing track of simple tasks or forgetting conversations. On those days, Thomas held her close and reminded her that needing help didn't make her weak. It made her human. Their love was not fragile. It had survived decades. It could survive this too. One evening, after a day full of laughter and soft sunlight, Marlene rested her head on Thomas's chest and said, "I was so afraid you'd see me differently." He kissed the top of her head and said, "I don't see you differently. I just see you more clearly." Tears gathered in her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. Their future remained uncertain, but not hopeless. They learned to honor each day as a gift. For nearly 30 years, Thomas had believed there were few mysteries left between him and his wife, Marlene. Their marriage was built on routines that had become almost sacred over time. Morning coffee brewed the same way she liked it, Saturday afternoons spent gardening, and quiet evenings where they would sit on the porch swing and talk about everything from their children to old memories from their early years. Their relationship wasn't flashy, but it was steady, warm, and familiar. It felt like home. But Thomas had begun to sense a subtle shift in the air long before Marlene said anything aloud. It was the kind of change that wasn't loud or obvious, but whispered through their daily life like a draft through a cracked window. At first, he brushed it off. After all, people evolved. They had lived almost their entire adult lives side by side. Surely shifts were normal. Yet something about Marlene's changes felt different. She had always been the grounding force between them, calm, clear-minded, content. But recently, Thomas noticed her staring off into the distance more often, lost in thought. She sometimes forgot small things, like where she set her keys or whether she'd already fed the cat. He teased her lovingly about getting older, but her smile didn't reach her eyes as it usually did. Even more troubling was the restlessness that settled over her. Their predictable routines no longer seemed to soothe her. She moved through the days with an unusual urgency, like someone searching for something invisible. Some mornings she woke before dawn and sat on the porch alone, wrapped in her blanket even when the air wasn't cold. When Thomas asked what she was thinking about, she would simply say, "Nothing important," and change the subject. One evening, after an unusually quiet dinner, Marlene placed her fork down and looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. It was a mixture of fear, longing, and something else, something that made Thomas's stomach twist. She reached out, gently took his hand, and said words that felt sharper than any argument they had ever had. "Thomas, I want to feel alive again." The sentence hit him like a blow, not because it was harsh, but because it was so unlike her. Feel alive again? Hadn't she been alive with him for nearly 30 decades? What was missing? What had changed? He knew better than to respond defensively, but anxiety crawled through him. Was she unhappy with their life? Did she want adventure, freedom, something or someone beyond their marriage? He forced himself to smile, tried to keep his voice steady, and asked what he meant. But Marlene only squeezed his hand, whispered, "I'm not sure yet," and withdrew into her silence again. That night, Thomas lay awake long after she fell asleep beside him. For the first time in their marriage, he felt an unfamiliar distance between them. Small, quiet, but undeniably real. And he had no idea what it meant or what it would eventually reveal. In the days following Marlene's unsettling confession, Thomas became increasingly aware of every small change in her behavior. It was as if her words had sharpened his senses, making him notice things he unconsciously ignored. At first, the differences were subtle, barely noticeable shifts in her daily patterns. But soon they began to grow, like cracks spreading across a window pane. Marlene, who once moved through life with calm predictability, started breaking her own habits. For nearly 30 years, she had risen at the same time every morning, sipping coffee beside Thomas while reading the news. Now she woke even earlier, slipping out of bed without a sound and leaving the house for long morning walks before he even opened his eyes. When he asked where she went, she simply replied, "Just out," with a smile that felt stretched thin. Her wardrobe changed too. Marlene had always preferred comfort, soft sweaters, warm colors, clothes that felt like her personality. But Thomas noticed her choosing sharper, more polished outfits. She looked beautiful, still undeniably herself, but there was an edge to her choices now, a deliberate effort to present something new to the world. Then there was the matter of the book club. She announced she had joined one suddenly, with no explanation. When he asked what they read, she would shrug and say, "Different things," before changing the subject. She came home late on those nights, her eyes tired and unfocused, as though her mind was still somewhere else. Their children remained unconcerned. When Thomas mentioned the changes during a family dinner, their daughter laughed and said, "Dad, Mom just wants some hobbies. Let her live a little." Her son teased, "Maybe she's becoming more interesting in her old age." Everyone chuckled except Thomas. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply off. He tried to convince himself that he was simply overthinking, that 30 years of routine have made him too sensitive to even harmless shifts. But the unease would not leave him. It clung to him, heavy and persistent. Everything changed the day he found the key. It was a small silver key with an engraved number on one side. Thomas discovered it accidentally while hanging Marlene's jacket, the metal glinting from a pocket she rarely used. He turned it over in his hands, confused. They didn't own any lockboxes or storage units. It wasn't for their home, car, or safe. When he heard her footsteps coming down the hallway, panic shot through him. Without thinking, he slipped the key back exactly where he found it. The moment felt strangely significant, as though crossing some invisible line would change everything. For the rest of the day, Thomas replayed the discovery in his mind. Why would Marlene need a key he didn't recognize? What was she locking away? Or what was she unlocking when she left the house alone? For the first time in nearly 30 decades, Thomas felt genuinely shut out of his wife's world. And that fear, quiet but sharp, settled deep in his chest, whispering a truth he didn't want to consider. Whatever Marlene was hiding, it was bigger than he realized. Thomas had always been a rational man, a thinker, not a watcher, but the unease that had been building inside him over the last few weeks began to twist into something he had never felt before: suspicion. He hated the feeling. It felt like a betrayal of the trust they had built over nearly 30 years. Yet Marlene's odd behaviors, her new secrecy, and the strange silver key made the feeling impossible to ignore. He tried to dismiss it at first, but each time Marlene left the house with vague explanations, the weight in his chest tightened. Eventually, curiosity and fear combined into a force he could no longer resist. One morning, when she left unusually early, Thomas grabbed his coat, waited a few minutes, and quietly followed her car at a distance. He felt absurd, like a character in a cheap detective show, but the seriousness of the situation pulled him forward. Marlene drove farther than he expected, leaving their peaceful suburb and heading into the older part of town. The buildings here were worn, the streets narrow, the atmosphere heavy with the scent of old brick and dust. Thomas stayed back, parking behind a row of cars. He watched as Marlene stepped out carrying a small canvas bag he had never seen before. She didn't hesitate. She walked with purpose to an old brick building that looked abandoned at first glance. A faded sign, boarded windows on one side, and a heavy metal door with peeling paint. It didn't look like any book club he had ever imagined. She reached into her jacket pocket. Thomas knew what she was grabbing and unlocked the door with the small silver key. A sharp sting hit him in the chest. For a long moment, Thomas couldn't move. He sat gripping the steering wheel, his mind racing. Why would she need a key to a place like this? What was inside? And, worst of all, why had she hidden it from him? His heart pounded as he contemplated following her inside, demanding the truth. But fear anchored him. Fear of the answer. Fear that the life he thought he understood was no longer real. So, he waited. Minutes turned into an hour, and an hour stretched longer. The building remained silent. Every now and then, someone walked past the street, but otherwise, the world felt strangely still. Thomas kept his eyes glued to the door, his mind filled with dark possibilities, affairs, secrets, double lives. He knew Marlene better than anyone, or at least he thought he did. But now, he wasn't so sure.